This is Camilla Gamet.
And I'll tell you, you gutted him like a fish in that apartment, too. You were relentless. You stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed until he was dead.
Gamet is in court for the murder of her boyfriend. 31 years old, Gamet lived in an apartment in Michigan with her 38-year-old boyfriend, Marcel Hill. Neighbors described Hill as reserved and polite. On the other hand, Gamet was always prone to anger. She experienced a lot of abuse and neglect from her family, leading to a difficult childhood. As she got older, she struggled with substance abuse and had a number of criminal charges against her, including assault and battery. In May 2012, neighbors heard noises and loud clattering coming from Gamet's apartment, and not long after, the police were notified. When the police responded to the distress call, they saw Gamet covered in blood with a broken floor lamp, dented frying pan, and a long, bloody knife. They also saw Marcel Hill dead. Camilla was arrested and charged with the murder of her boyfriend, Marcel Hill. Prosecutors alleged that Camilla had killed Marcel in a fit of rage after an argument. However, Gamet insisted that she thought Marcel was an intruder and reacted in self-defense. During the trial, witnesses testified that they had heard the couple arguing, and medical reports showed that Marcel had been strangled, suffered blunt force trauma to the head, and had more than 20 stab wounds. Camilla's trial was widely publicized, with many people following the case closely. Before she was handed her sentence, Marcel's aunt, Diana Banks Joyner, read an emotional victim's impact statement.
I also remember the cries of help that he screamed as you plunged that knife in and out of his body.
But as family members read a letter to Gamet, she could be seen rolling her eyes and even laughing.
And you're going to shut your mouth or I'm going to have some duct tape put on it.
Well, he attacked me.
We'll wait here for a moment so we can get her quiet.
However, it wasn't emotional for Gamet, who kept interrupting her so much that Judge John McBain threatened to tape her mouth. Still, the threat did not dissuade Gamet, who insisted she was being lied against. Her behavior caused Judge McBain to momentarily halt proceedings while court officers looked for duct tape.
Basically, at trial, the way I was portrayed, mostly everything was lies. There was a little bit of truth, but mostly I was convicted off of lies.
Gamet showed no remorse for her crimes and would laugh and roll her eyes at several intervals when her crime was described.
We have no choice but to send her where she will also die. I can't believe she stands before you doing this morning.
She was eventually found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Judge McBain noted that this was the worst case he had ever seen.
Sam, and I'll tell you, you gutted him like a fish in that apartment, too. You were relentless. You stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed until he was dead. You didn't think he was an intruder. You know, maybe one stab wound, okay. Maybe that's self-defense. But you put in 11 more to make sure he was good and dead. So I agree with the family. I hope you die in prison as well.
Gamet's behavior in court was melodramatic, but not as theatrical as the behavior of the relatives of Kyandria Cook. This is Kyandria Cook. Cook was a teenager from South Daytona whose trial made headlines due to the dramatic events that unfolded. Cook was just 18 years old when she was arrested and charged with carjacking. Her accomplice was her 17-year-old boyfriend, Kendrick Bass. The two lovers conspired, used a dating site to lure 27-year-old Perry Nida to the street under the guise of buying weed and having fun. Nida was accompanied by 17-year-old Emmanuel Purcell. When they reached Cook's location, she rambled for a while before Bass appeared in a mask and a gun. He robbed them and shot Purcell in the stomach. Luckily, the teenager survived. The criminal couple made away with their valuables. The next day, they were on the road again for another carjacking, but were quickly arrested by the police. She was charged with principal to carjacking with a deadly weapon, principal to attempted carjacking with a deadly weapon, and principal to aggravated battery with a deadly weapon. During her trial, Cook made headlines when a video of her in court went viral on social media. A miscommunication with her attorney led her and her family to believe she wouldn't be imprisoned since she had no prior sentencing or criminal case. It shocked them when Circuit Judge Matt Foxman found her guilty and sentenced her to 20 years. Immediately when her sentence was read, her mother started wailing and screaming at the top of her voice. With her mother in tears and on the floor, Cook started crying too.
That being said, this was intentional. It was an orchestrated ambush, and you are a main part of that. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and adjudicate you guilty of all 3 charges, sentence you to 20 years in state prison. All fines and costs.
The emotional moment caused the judge to stop the proceeding for a moment while the disruption was handled. In the end, her sentence was reviewed and she was resentenced to 11 years in prison and 10 years of parole for her role in the carjacking. While the sentence might seem severe, the drama that unfolded during the trial caught the media's and the public's attention. Another case that was similar to Kyandria Cook's own in content was that of Damon Kemp. This is Damon Kemp. Kemp's outburst in court went viral on social media and almost made people forget the nature of the crime he committed. In the video, Kemp yells at the top of his lungs. The judge and the entire courtroom, including the victims' families, appear to be taken aback by his behavior, and efforts were made to calm him down, but Kemp continues to shout. Kemp had posted a picture of himself on social media with a gun, stating that he intended to get some cash. Kemp was living with Payton and Ingraham at an apartment in Daytona Beach, Florida. Payton and Ingraham were cousins who were helping Kemp with an accommodation until he got his own. It was unclear whether Kemp was under the influence of narcotics or if he was sober, but on December 7, 2018, he snuck into the shared apartment and stole some money. The 19-year-old then shot and killed Jordan Payton and Trey Ingraham. The court heard that Kemp confessed that he killed his friends to police on the street. He was later arrested and charged with 2 counts of second-degree felony murder with a firearm. However, when he was wheeled into court for his hearing, things took a bizarre turn as Kemp bulged his eyes, bared his teeth, pulled his shoulders back, and began to yell at the top of his lungs in the courtroom.
I've appointed the public defender to represent you, so you have a lawyer this morning. And after I've done all that, I determine the conditions of your release, if you can be released. You already heard all those instructions. Gun! 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 Gun!
The outburst was so loud that it could be heard outside the courtroom. Kemp ignored the judge, who tried unsuccessfully to get his attention and was eventually wheeled out of the courtroom. The family members of the deceased cousins were also in the courtroom, sobbing and yelling at Kemp. Damon Kemp's screams, coupled with the deceased relative's outburst, made the court hearing an emotional and dramatic one, as did the case of Anthony Kirkland. This is Anthony Kirkland.
My name is Anthony Kirkland.
Anthony, you have an unsworn statement you'd like to read?
Yes, sir.
Kirkland is infamous for his heinous crimes and dramatic sentencing. Anthony Kirkland was a convicted serial killer who murdered at least 5 women between 2006 and 2009 in Cincinnati, Ohio. Kirkland was born on September 13, 1968, and suffered physical and mental abuse as a child. In May 1987, Kirkland sexually assaulted and murdered his girlfriend, Leola Douglas, because she didn't give in to his sexual requests. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison but served only 16 years before he was released on parole in 2004. He laid low for a few years before starting his murdering spree. Kirkland killed 4 women after his release from prison. He was responsible for the death of 2 teenagers, 13-year-old Esme Kenny and 14-year-old Cassania Crawford, and 2 adults, 45-year-old Mary Jo Newton and 25-year-old Camilla Rollison. His MO was to burn his victims to conceal evidence of sexual assault. He was arrested in 2019 after being caught in possession of Esme Kenny's watch and iPod. He was charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of attempted rape, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, and 4 counts of abuse of a corpse. During his trial, Anthony Kirkland's behavior was erratic.
I could not stop the rage and the anger. And make the bad Anthony go away. I could not tell the police why I did it. Because I don't know why. They say I am an evil. They say I am evil and a monster. They're right. Ever since I was little, everyone said I was bad. Even my mom hated me, but I don't blame her. I even hated me.
He admitted to being evil and a monster. He also pointed to the abuse he received as a child. In March 2010, a jury found him guilty of all the charges against him and recommended a death sentence. He was sentenced to death. When he heard his fate, he slumped to the floor. This is the moment when he learns his fate.
Count 3, aggravated robbery with specifications. Count 4, aggravated murder.
Everybody get seated, please.
Kirkland's behavior in court was shocking. One would have anticipated that with the level of his crimes, he would have expected the sentence handed to him. Nevertheless, his behavior was nothing compared to the drama queen, Kimberly Kessler. This is Kimberly Kessler.
It's fine.
Let's just put me back on myself.
Sam, come back.
I want to get rid of the public defender's office. Yeah, exactly. Jordan Beard is Johnson's nephew. Jordan Beard is Jolia's cousin. Jordan Beard is Johnson's nephew. Jordan Beard is Jolene Cummings' cousin.
Kessler was a former hairstylist who was convicted of killing her co-worker, 34-year-old Jolene Cummings, and disposing of her body in a landfill. Her crimes were heinous, and her behavior during the trial and sentencing was nothing less than dramatic and disturbing. The 53-year-old Kessler was arrested after investigations by the police pointed to her as the mastermind of the disappearance of Cummings. However, the police were shocked when they discovered that Kessler was a wanted fugitive who was living under an alias and had been on the run for more than 20 years. She was wanted in many states and had used more than 15 aliases over the years. Kessler was charged with first-degree murder. During her trial, she made bizarre statements and false claims in court. She frequently cursed, spoke over the judge, and was generally a nuisance. In fact, she had to be wheeled out of the court on multiple occasions after she repeatedly yelled that an ex-member of her defense team was the victim's cousin.
Jordan Beard is Johnson's nephew. Jordan Beard is Jolia's cousin. Jordan Beard is Johnson's nephew. Jordan Beard is Jolene Cummings' cousin. Jordan Beard is Jolene's cousin. Jolene's cousin. Jordan Beard is Jolene's cousin. Jordan Beard is Jolene Cummings' cousin.
She had to watch proceedings from a room close to the court. Still, her abnormal behavior didn't end in court. Prison officials testified that she always made vulgar statements, refused to eat, and frequently scattered feces on the windows of her cell and threw it at the officials. It was so much that the officials celebrated with cake, ice cream, and drinks when she was finally transferred from the Nassau County Jail in Florida to the Florida Women's Reception Center. Kimberly Kessler was eventually sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murder of Jolene Cummings.